district, part of Riyadh. And it's a pleasure to introduce Farah Abushullaih, very familiar person here in the scene, and an artist and cultural expert. And the floor is yours.
All right, great. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today at the 4th edition of Noura Riyadh and this closing panel. I first like to give a thanks to the full team for also coming up with such a great idea for this closing panel. The title of our conversation today is The Role of Cultural Institutions in the 21st Century. So I'm going to leave most of the time for the panelists to speak with the wealth of information that they have regarding this topic, but just to set up the stage in terms of what we're looking at today. So the format and idea of the museum is truly breaking apart globally, whether due to technological changes or geopolitical pressures. To have a place in the world that is really pushing the museum and the idea of curatorial narrative and how that comes to inform a society and a community is very interesting. Today we have with us directors from the eastern province of Saudi Arabia to the western province. We have with us Farah, the director of ITHRA, Nora, who is the director of Samoka, Jack Persekian, with the Black Gold Museum, and Nora Aldabal, who is the long title of Director of Arts and Creative Industries. So with that, I think the first question that we'll really put to the panelists, which is, so the idea of the museum really has a close connection to society. And for each one of you, and we can start with you, Nora, from your personal perspective, what is the primary role that museums can provide to a community?
Thank you, Sarah. And first of all, thank you, Noura Riyadh. Congratulations on an amazing exhibition, and thank you for having us here today. I think the role of a museum is really an integral role within the community. You grow up having your home, the school, and the museum together. So there is a lot to take in and learn from each of those kind of catalysts within the community. And seeing all the development that's happening now with Vision 2030 and all the museums coming up, I think it's great really for generations to come to have this as an integral part of their upbringing and places to visit as they grow and learn from.
Hello. Thank you very much, Sarah. Thanks, Noura, and congratulations, and deeply honored to be here. I think for museums, I've thought of like four main points or four main pillars that museums can basically base themselves upon. First, the museum needs to be a place where there's giving, a place that can give information, give ideas, give inspiration, give knowledge, and all of this needs to be based on trust. So it needs to be trustworthy, and trust meaning this information needs to be based on research, needs to be based on facts. So whoever goes to the museum is somehow assured that whatever she or he is seeing and learning is something that is actually factual and based on them. And third, this all of this needs to be accessible. So the museum needs to be open, needs to have whatever means and modalities of passing this information, making this information accessible, making this knowledge within the reach of people. And fourth, all of this needs to be in a place that is beautiful, comfortable, welcoming, and generous. So I think these are like the 4 points that I think museums can give.
Beautiful. Nora? You can switch it.
Thank you. So just to build off what Jack was saying, he used the word accessibility, and I think this is an incredibly important pillar of what a museum should be, especially in a burgeoning country like Saudi that is developing the arts industry. You want this to be a place where everyone feels welcome. They feel like they can gain something from this experience, whether that is knowledge, cultural engagement, a place for debate, a place that challenges your ideas, especially when we're talking about contemporary art. It's quite a special opportunity where you have these physical manifestations of what's happening in the culture. What are people thinking about, talking about, and whether or not you agree with that, whether it challenges your beliefs, whether it reinforces your beliefs, or whether it's just something aesthetically interesting to look at that changes your approach about materiality, it changes how you think about the potential of human creativity. These are all so many broad ways to think about what types of experiences you can have in museums, and these are all very central ideas when we think about audience building, which is the most central part of museums.
Beautiful. I love that idea of a museum as a reflection to society, right? Because artists really are spectators and really speculative or reflective to the environment within which they are working. Farah, whatever word or term you feel like museums can occupy for a community of people or a society.
طيب, السلام عليكم جميعا. I'm very happy to be here with you today, and thank you to Noura Riyadh for organizing such a great program. I think the panelists have given a few definitions of museums that are great and encompassing. In my opinion, museums are many things. I think in a more specific term, we can see it as a time machine that takes you from past, present to future. It encompasses the history of this region, this culture, Saudi Arabia, everything that we know of our history and how it informs our present and our future. So it's really a place for people to go to be able to learn more about themselves as a culture, but also about other cultures as well. And a museum has the potential to do all of that.
Beautiful. Nora, with the work that you're doing with Al-Ula, when we spoke earlier, there's this idea that came about, which is the artist as catalyst. In developing museums and cultural institutions that are about to come online in Al-Ula, how do you see the role of the artist in really providing a pathway for the creation of those curatorial and collection narratives?
As you mentioned, I think with the artists being catalysts, really Al-Ula is a place that is built by artists for artists, and we always see it that way since the beginning of starting to work on the master plan, which is titled Journey Through Time. The first master plan for Al-Ula, it really took the artist in the heart of it, having Al-Ula as a place for land art, having Al-Ula integrate artists in all different layers of the development. So we have, for example, with the urban development in Al Jadida, we have the artisans who work with us at Madrasa Dira designing the pathways. We have a residency program that we've started about 4 years ago, where we really invite artists to understand the nature, the surrounding, and also the community, and start to work on research to help us develop our cultural assets. The master plan contains 15 cultural assets, some of which are museums, and the Contemporary Art Museum in Al-Ula is a main one of them. So that kind of input and research is really meant to enrich the museum, and we see it as a long-term collaboration with the artists.
Have you found that kind of, because now it's 4 years that the residencies are happening in Al-Ula, have you found that that has changed the narrative of some of these institutions in a kind of proactive give and take relationship? And
I think it definitely enriched our understanding of what the museum in Al-Ula should be, and we're working as well with the community to understand what is that need or missing gap in Al-Ula. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, Al-Ula is a hub for land art, so a lot of the work is about collaborating with nature, understanding your surroundings and the community. So that becomes kind of a very, I would say, kind of direct angle that the artists are working on. And then we also work with artists on commissions that also help them understand in terms of what kind of challenges they face, and how can you integrate and collaborate with nature. Collaborating probably with artists or a designer, it comes with its own challenges, but unless you listen to nature and take it within, it's a very different kind of collaboration.
Totally, and it's a very unique environment. I find it really interesting, this idea of the premeditation to the museum and how the artist is engaged in that premeditation and the potentiality of it. I think in a lot of ways that's kind of what Samoka is doing in Jack's as a meditative act towards Samoka, which will finally open in a couple of years. Nora, can you tell us a little bit more about how you see Samoka operating as a cultural institution that caters to a museum?
Absolutely. So when we talk about Samoka, which is right next door, we actually call it Samoka at Jack's to differentiate it from Samoka Dir'iyya, which will hopefully be opened in a few years. So Samoka at Jack's is a Kunsthalle, and this is a German word that's used very often in the art world to mean a museum without a collection. We offer a dynamic program of temporary exhibitions, and in doing so, I think we play two very fundamental roles, or actually three. The first is to help develop and build a museum audience for the whole ecosystem. The second is to introduce a very diverse array of visual languages and meanings of contemporary art practices so that our audience can develop their personal and communal definition of what is contemporary art. And the third is to introduce artworks and the concept of a national art collection to the country. Because while we don't have a permanent art collection, which makes my job much easier, Samoka Dir'iyya aims to be the preeminent modern and contemporary museum in the city, if not the kingdom. So it will host a large collection, it will have a large research center, a big permanent collection telling the story of Saudi contemporary art, regional contemporary art, of course within the context of international movements and art itself. So a lot of works that pass through Samoka at Jack's are often acquired for the Samoka Dir'iyya, and in doing so, maybe in a few years, when you're in Samoka Dir'iyya, you'll see a work that was born from Samoka at Jack's, and I think that's incredibly important. And when Noura, you mentioned art as a catalyst, but more importantly, artists as a catalyst, I look out and see a lot of the artists from Jack's here, and that makes me very happy because we're in their neighborhood. Jack's belongs to them, it was built by them, and we're incredibly lucky to not only learn from them and collaborate with them, but also build a program based on what we see in their studios, what they're thinking about, and what they're doing. So in that way, they're our collaborators as well, which we're incredibly lucky for.
Beautiful. I think the word Farah that you said, the museum is a place for time travel, is really potent because in a lot of ways, I think the moment we live in Saudi today is an archival one. And a lot of the work that artists do is archival by nature. Jack, you have worked with the Sharjah Art Foundation, you have worked with the Sharjah Biennale, and now with the Black Gold Museum and multiple other commissioned works. I'm very curious to hear from you, how do you see the commissioned work as a site for archival practice, or even just as a site for negotiation, or a site for expression of a museum intention, whether that's with the Black Gold Museum or any of the other commissions you've worked on?
Well, you see, the whole issue with commissioning work is usually the context. And what makes an artwork, or part of what makes an artwork is its relationship to the context that it basically situates itself in and responds to. And hence, from my humble experience, there needs to be, well, there are several elements, but one important element is time. And artists need to kind of really invest themselves in understanding where they're working and what they're doing and what they're working for. So in contrary to usually filling up a space, occupying a wall, whatever, there's a certain responsibility that the artist and the artwork carries with them. So hence, I think to me that's the defining line between serious artists and serious works and things that are there for entertainment. And this is a very fine line. And hence, we, as people responsible in these different institutions, carry with us a lot of responsibility and a lot of weight of trying to gauge what is there to actually really reflect the intention, and what is there just as a filler of time and a filler of space and a filler for basic program. And in times of great push, when you're trying to kind of achieve so much in so little time, sometimes you miss out on certain things that are quite important. Hence, I think the experience with what Nora was saying between Samoka, Jack's, and Samoka, the big Samoka, is this kind of process where time is filtering out, things that are just there momentarily, and things that would with time would have resonance and would have meaning and would stay.
Yeah, and I often think that majority of the Saudi population is today below the age of 35. I think at a moment where we do build these museums and cultural institutions, there's a very big role that we can do in preserving a lot of these histories. We spoke, me and you, Nora, a little bit about the artist practice itself and what you've seen in the commissions in Samoka so far in terms of documentation.
Yeah, I think something that's been quite interesting for me to discover amongst the Saudi artists that I've gotten to know over the past year, working with them and learning from them, is quite a few of them have a tendency towards archiving. Dr. Saad Huwaidi, Ahmed Matir, so many, they take it upon themselves to document, to archive, to collect. And it's across all generations of Saudi artists and across all regions. And when I think about what's the impetus behind this, something that's quite strong that I think is that as a country we're being thrust into the future so rapidly, so quickly. Our country's changing so much that there's a sense of urgency to retain and celebrate our histories, whether that's personal or communal. And at the same time, with the opening up of this country, there's been a huge paradigm shift where we're now not only recognizing but celebrating the idiosyncrasies of the region, of our country, what makes the North different from the South. And all of this is being celebrated. And the artist, by collecting and using this research and using this documentation, whether it's personal or communal, is being reflected in their artworks, which consequently is being reflected in our exhibition programming, commissioning, and collections. So, you know, Jack with his museum that kind of focuses on oil as a transformer for our country, economically, culturally, socially, etc. That's incredibly prevalent there as well. I mean, a big part of his research, from my understanding, is looking into archives in that sense.
Very interesting. You know, Lulu Al-Hamoud once said in a talk that artists today are very lucky because they have a wealth of information that the Ministry of Culture and other entities are putting out for them to use, versus when she started her practice, there wasn't that information. So I think there is something really interesting happening with art practice today in relation to that. I wanted, since you mentioned the Black Gold Museum and ITRA, I think what's really also interesting about the panelists today, you guys, is that each one really drives a museum institution with a very different strategic intention, which is really an indication to the future of museums, where gone are the times of the National Museum, the museum of the archival history without kind of any connection or connotation to the contemporary and the present. So maybe, Jack, if you can tell us a little bit, to whatever capacity that you can, about the Black Gold Museum.
Well, in brief, Black Gold tells the story of oil and humanity. And it goes through 4 chapters that starts from discovery through the period when, you know, kind of oil represented the dream of the future. And I'm speaking about the whole world and not specifically focused on Saudi Arabia. To the chapter where, you know, we discovered that there are, you know, kind of bad side effects to abusing and overusing petroleum, to the last chapter, which is about visions of the future. And I think, to me, that's the most interesting chapter, because it is a place that, even though this is a permanent exhibition, it's a museum, supposedly, but to me, that's a very temporary space, because when you talk about visions of a future, meaning that's constantly changing, and hence my challenge was, how do I work with artists on thinking what would be the future like without, you know, kind of the comfort of where you see most of the artists trying to reflect backwards, you know, kind of looking retrospectively on what happened or what's happening, or, you know. No, to me it was like, no, how can you look now into the future? Of course, a very good example would be thinking of the work of Leonardo da Vinci, of how he combined science and art and everything, and, you know, kind of tried to come up with ideas of the future. And he was an engineer. And nowadays you don't see that. Very rarely you see that. And hence you know, the challenge that I put forward to the artists, I wanted to work with them, is like, you know, how can we now, you know, move out of the comfort zone and try to kind of challenge ourselves and look into what's going to happen in the future. What do you think? What should happen? How is the relationship with oil, or how is the relationship with energy in general? Yeah. And to me, that kind of puts Black Gold Museum in a very very special place, a very unique place amongst all the other museums in the world that talk about petroleum.
Yeah. You use the term the museum as a site of negotiation, which I thought was incredible, because truly museums are no longer spaces where you are just receiving information, but rather through the commissioned work and through the curatorial research, they really become a site where ideation and research and negotiation can happen. I think with that, ITRA, I'd love to hear from you, Farah, in terms of the galleries that you have. ITRA is the one museum with us today that has launched in 2018. How was public engagement, and how have you worked on leveraging that?
For Ithra, I think it's been a very long and interesting journey. And even before 2018, when we opened the doors to the public, we were operating without the building from 2012, 2013, creating public programs for just mass engagement and consumption, where we really wanted to test people's appetite. And that gave us a lot of information that we took into the building and what day one looked like in terms of operation and what we wanted to present to our public. And since opening our doors in 2018, the jump has been incredible. Just in terms of what we see, in terms of the development of our community that we've built, the ecosystem that we have. So as an example, we started in 2018 with 250,000 visitors a year. Our Net Promoter Score, which is how satisfied people are with our programming, was at about 50%. And now we jump into 2024, where we welcome at least 1.2 million visitors a year. And our Net Promoter Score is 75%. Thank you. And it's amazing, and it just shows you in the beginning what you mentioned in terms of trust. That trust has to be built. What are we showing you? Why are we showing this to you? And what do we want you to learn out of it? And then we started hearing the voices of our people through the feedback and the research that we did. A lot of data was gathered, and there's a lot of things that us as institutions can and cannot do with data. There's the whole social impact aspect of things that is very challenging to actually pinpoint in terms of the impact of museums or cultural institutions in a more tangible sense. But what we see is a lot of the intrinsic value that we offer playing out across the scene through different industries, through different artists that we've supported, the collaborations that we've had. Ithra is nothing without our partners and collaborators. Seeing that trust from the community and that, let's say, there was a bigger responsibility on Ithra in terms of what we're presenting, curating to the public. Because in the beginning we would see a more, let's say, passive response from our public, but now they're very engaged. They actually go into the details of what we're presenting. They ask you questions, why this, why not that, how this, yeah, exactly. It's a beautiful thing to see, and it's something that at this point we're almost 6 years into operation. What is our 10-year anniversary going to look like, right? Like, what do we want out of 10 years of Ithra as a building and the impact that we want to see? That community engagement is something that we discover new things on a daily basis about. Inshallah, by 10-year anniversary, we'll be able to share with you more tangible social impact results that we're developing now. I think it's difficult for the kingdom to do that with a lot of new entities that are coming up. We still don't have the data, we still don't have the research. But hopefully what we've learned will help, inshallah.
Inshallah, honestly, it's an inspiration to, or let's say it's great to have the data sets for what it looks like on day one and what it looks like a few years later, and what the strategies are to increase engagement. You mentioned also the duration of your galleries from permanent to temporary.
So Ithra has multiple galleries. I hope you've all visited. If you haven't, please do. It's a beautiful building in Sharqiya that we welcome you all to come and see. The museum specifically, let's say within all the spaces in the museum, we hold about 13,000 square meters of space. It's a very interdisciplinary approach that we have. So we have, for example, the first children's museum in the kingdom, which is targeted at children ages 0 to 12. And then we have the main galleries, which each gallery speaks about a different theme between contemporary art, Saudi culture and heritage, Islamic art. And these are our three, let's say, exhibitions that are not permanent exhibitions. The first two galleries are on a 9-month basis. And we have one that is Islamic art, which is a bigger investment. So this is about 3 to 4 years of an exhibition run. And then we have our permanent galleries, which is the energy exhibit that talks about the history of Aramco and the discovery of oil. And then we have the natural history of the Arabian Peninsula, which gives you a nice screenshot of the history of the region. and the Aramco Gallery, which deep dives into Aramco's impact on societal development in the kingdom. For the 9 months are the ones that we try to make the most dynamic. We engage with artists, we engage with partners. And back to your question of why 9 months specifically, we used to have it as 6 months, sometimes we consider it a year. But within what we're doing and the targets we're trying to achieve as museum visits, we realized that we need to give people a little bit more time to, first of all, hear about the exhibitions. It takes some time to get the word out. Communication channels don't always do the job in terms of the targets that you want. فعلى بال ما you reach that audience that you want. We saw 9 months to be a good amount of time, also given the amounts that are invested from ISRA, because building an exhibition is not cheap. It's something that takes a big investment. And in the past couple of years, we've even looked into how we can make that a little bit more sustainable for our exhibitions moving forward. So walls of an exhibition you'll see in one exhibition and then recreate it somehow for another exhibition. That really helped us get to a wider audience, let's say. Something maybe to know about ISRA as a fun fact is that 60% of our visitors are families, and we have about maybe the percentage of visitation within 1 year from one person is about 4 times a year. So this means that we have a public that is really interested to see what we're going to present next. They're always expecting something new from ISRA. And we really try to become the hub for, let's say, national celebration and pride within our communities. So the highest numbers of visitations that we receive are, of course, National Day, Eid. You really see those times as the times really families want to come together, spend time together, experience new things. All of this has led to what we see today.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. So we have 2 museums that are really looking at the idea of oil. One through oil as a material and derivative materials to oil and how that informed art practice. And then you have the museum that looks at the lineage of oil production in Saudi Arabia and then really expanding that into contemporary art practices. Nora, I'm curious in Al-Ula, in terms of the 15 assets that are coming online soon, how do they, and again, if this is something that you can share with us today, how do the archaeological sites and the findings that you are unraveling informing these museum spaces?
I'll go back to your first question because I think it relates to the 15 cultural assets. So they're all, the master plan is very much integrated. And if we look at Al-Ula as a whole, it's an open living museum from your point of arrival, from the moment you leave your house. So the heritage sites are museums by themselves, the way you experience them, the way you have the rawis who give you the narrations, and my colleague Iman is here. She can probably, if you have any specific questions after the panel, you can reach out to her. But it's really about having that full journey experience. We're also working a lot with the heritage sites in terms of integrating contemporary arts with it. We've got one of the residencies was actually placed in the heart of the old town, and it was a residency that looked at digital works and AI, but at the same time very much integrated within the materiality specifically, and looking at sustainability as well. So that was kind of an interesting project that we worked on, and we continue working on this. And then in terms of the rest of the assets as well, you have the museums, but you also need the production hubs, you need the artist studios, you need the residency programs and the heritage sites, and then you've got Wadi al-Fan. So it's really about, like, that. The master plan is about integrating those together and having that full journey that gives you every bit of the puzzle, I would say.
Great. So you know, this idea, I think a lot of people, a daunting question for a lot of people is, we have a lot of these great institutions that are coming online very soon. But then in terms of the infrastructure that can support them, whether that is everything from the production site for the artworks, the operations of a museum infrastructure, the shipping and logistics, these are all parts of the overall cycle that are just really growing right now in Saudi. Farah, you've mentioned a little bit about this kind of, I call it talent development that happens in ITHRA. Or I think there was exchange programs with different museums in order to leverage the institution employees themselves. Is that still existing today? And can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think there is really a seed for a solution there.
Sure. Okay, so when I first joined ITHRA in 2012, ITHRA was being led by one of, I would say, the most visionary leaders that ITHRA has seen, which is Fuad al-Darman. Fuad al-Darman was working with Fatma al-Rashid on building the building, but also working on the programs. And this is when they were really starting to hire people. So when I first joined, maybe we were like 50 people. Nora Aldabal was with me. And it was a nice small family that was really excited about a big dream. So the visionaries that we had, which is very important for any country to thrive, it's the vision of what's going on, Vision 2030. And they knew that for building capabilities, you need to get those people to experience new things, learn new things beyond what they've learned in their formal studies, let's say. All the creative industries were just up and coming, so it would be rare to find local people who actually have worked in those industries for a long time. So their approach was more along trying to see who is passionate enough for the work and really investing in them and supporting them, developing their skills. And part of that was taking the employees or specific employees to different institutions across the world. Some of these institutions were institutions that ITHRA was already working with. It was a nice cross-collaboration, let's say. For example, Snøhetta, who designed ITHRA from Norway, Fatma al-Rashid, who was the lead architect, went and spent 2 years with Snøhetta to actually develop the concept of the building and the feasible building that you see today. That's one example, for example. Nora Aldabal, Center Pompidou, and I believe we have other people who went to, for example, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. You can see these people really building their knowledge and capabilities, learning what they needed to learn or seeing how these entities operate, and then coming back to ITHRA and customizing all of that knowledge towards what we wanted to do as a cultural center, because ITHRA, I think, is very rare in terms of the components that you see in ITHRA. The museum, the library, the theater, a cinema, there's a knowledge hub, an innovation lab. And that was very, as a strategy, to develop a strategy for a culture that complex is very difficult. But it was nice getting all of that experience and developing something that is very unique, I would say.
Totally. So I'll end our talk with one question, which I think is a vital one as a reflection. I think what is happening today in Saudi Arabia has happened in the UAE and in the Gulf, let's say 20 years ago. We have two of our panelists that were involved or were present, Jack Persekian in particular. How do you see the difference, the contrast? How do you compare these two environments?
Maybe I don't want to compare, but I think what's really important is to understand what this value chain means in terms of the industry. And I think it does not work if you develop, for example, the infrastructure, say build the buildings and train people to run these institutions. I think there are several components to this chain that they all need to be secured, and they all need to operate within this sphere in order to kind of basically carry this this industry and move forward with it in terms of development. And what I mean is that if you have the institution, you need the artists, and the artists need the schools, and the schools need the teachers, and the teachers are connected to publications, and publications need publishing houses, and publishing houses also have disseminate information. So this information is disseminated through different channels like magazines, and you have critics, and part of them are curators, and curators advise collectors, and collectors help support the artists, and it's a whole chain. And if you focus on developing part of it, then there will be imbalance, and it won't work. So if you're looking at the scene and trying to understand how we need to move forward, you need to basically be aware of all these different components. Of course, I forgot to mention art fairs and biennales and etc. and Kunsthalles, and so all of that need to work, and you need to basically keep an eye where there are people who are operating in all these different fields and are supported somehow. And if they're not supported, you need to make something about it in order for them eventually to start revolving in this sphere, and hence create this equilibrium that can eventually sustain itself and carry itself into the future. That's how I see things.
Yeah, and I guess time will tell with that, and I think it is a slow-paced development. I think also Saudi growing after the age of the internet, having most of our audiences and the communities and peoples that are building these museums have been very plugged into global conversations, is also something will change the types of museums that come up here today. I think with that, if anyone has any questions or queries, we have one over there.
I can ask. Thank you, everyone. That was very enriching. You tapped into how, collections are being built right now, and what we've been doing in parallel with that. And I can see, some sort of a common case in many institutions in Saudi. As they build their buildings, as they build their collections, they start working on ground. Ithra before the building, they've been everywhere, not only in Dhahran, in all of Saudi. They've been really pushing that envelope of providing cultural experiences. And we can see in Al-Ula so much are going on before we even see the museums. And also Samoka with the Dir'iyya / the Jacks. It makes me think a lot about how, as institutions, we're looking at how programming would affect the narrative of our collections. And when I try to look at what happens in the West, obviously the collections have existed for so long, and in many cases, most cases, the collection would influence the programming and how it would take shape, while we can see here it's kind of an opposite situation. So I wanted to know from your perspective, how would that affect the institution, the Saudi institution, and how it engages with the society?
I'll jump in just really quickly. I think that's such a brilliant question, and I think to draw the comparison between the West and here is really important, because we didn't inherit as a country a huge collection, from the Habsburgs or what have you. But something that's quite important to mention is we talk about art as a new industry, but artists have always been here. The institutions are catching up. So that's always something I think is quite important to say, that art has always existed, especially in Saudi, and we're just giving them homes. But when you think about building a collection, we have the opportunity to build it from square one, to build the foundation, and to do that, you also you think about how are we thinking about history, how are we thinking about our place as Saudis in our own country and broader. So just as an example, which I think there's an institution that's being built by the Ministry of Culture called the Museum of World Cultures in King Salman Park, and this will be quite an encyclopedic museum from ancient through to contemporary. And when you're doing that and you haven't inherited a collection, you're building a collection, you're creating your program, you have the opportunity to rethink our past and civilization. So instead of being organized chronologically or geographically, which puts us in silos and looks at human development in a linear way, we all know progression isn't linear. The museum is organized thematically, and in doing so, you're not only drawing links between different cultures, but we're placing certain conversations at the forefront, and that can change because permanent collections are always highlighted in different ways through the temporary programming as well.
Thank you, Nora. I think also a big part of it is the programming is very important because you're almost building the museum without walls, and what you don't want to do is have a building that people would probably not know how to engage with. So things like when you activate that and make sure that you test your programs, you test the exhibitions, the insights, get all this information as you develop, the housing institution becomes kind of a fact eventually, but the museum is there. The other thing, and probably within the context of Al-Ula, but also other historical areas in Saudi, it's a live project. So there's a huge collection. The collection is there, and discoveries are there. We have one of the largest archaeological missions in Al-Ula. And every few days we hear about a new discovery that's adding to the narrative, that's probably changing the narrative. So you need to be part of this. It's a living process that we learn from as we move forward. Thank you.
Very interesting, this idea of how to build a collection either through residency programs, through the artist commission, and how maybe within the context of Saudi or the East or whatever term you want to use, we really need to crack the code on where these collections are coming from and what narratives are they saying and how can they become sites of negotiation, sites of dialogue, sites of using the artist as a catalyst rather than already premeditated ideas that we are just housing within the museum. And I think there's so much potential in looking at that and building our museums today. I don't know if there's any other question. One more.
Thank you for this enriching conversation and thought-provoking conversation. I have two questions. The first one is about comparing the Eastern experience and the Global South's experience and interaction with the art compared to the Western experience. And I wonder, in your institutions, how are you finding these differences and what type of activities or niche streams of work that you're doing that is very different to your collaborators in the West? And my second question is specifically to Al-Ula. So I'm a native of Al-Hijr, and we're very well aware of the archaeological work that you're doing there. But I wonder what interactions are you having with the locals, and what are the artists doing in order to interact more with the history of the region? I'm also interested in any stories that you can share with interactions between the locals and the art pieces, especially now that they are in open air and open spaces. Yeah, so these are my two questions. Thanks.
Do you want to? Sure, yeah. I can speak a little bit about what we do in ISRA in terms of how we collect or work with artists and commission work or loan work. We try to stay true to our title of King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture. We do dedicate the majority of our collection to Saudi artists and Arab artists, but we have I want to say at least 20% of our work is based on international artists from all over the world. So we don't, we try to be as inclusive as possible, let's say. And we do that through ensuring that we have diverse demographics and geographies covered within the exhibitions that we show. That will really show ISRA as like a supporter of global citizenship in general. بس طبعا us as a museum here in Saudi Arabia, it's very important for us to make sure that we're collecting what's relevant to what's happening today and what was relevant to what was happening yesterday and what we think about the future. I think a good example of this is the ISRA Art Prize. The ISRA Art Prize, it's one of the largest art grants, I want to say, in the world, and ISRA ends up owning this piece as part of our collection. So I want to give one example of like Nadia Kabi-Linkem, who won in 2021. And her work was a very important screenshot of what was happening during COVID and her, let's say, hope and aspirations for the future and moving forward. So that's just one example of how important it is for you to make sure that you're flexible in terms of what you collect, because like Nora said, every day our culture, identity, behaviors are changing, and we want to try to gather as much of that as possible.
And to address your second question, I think we have many different programs with the community, and really I think they are the core of, first of all, our understanding of the space of Al-Ula, and to know so much about the heritage, both tangible and intangible. The Rawi's program, which I've addressed earlier, includes mostly amazing members from the community, and every time I go there for a tour, I have a different perspective that's very personal to that Rawi. Also, another program is Madrasat al-Dira, where we take it upon us to really uplift the quality of artisans. And it's been, we've started in 2019, and today it's amazing to see the work of those artisans in Milan, in Venice, in Homo Faber, and today collected by some of the major collectors around the world. So to take, one specific artisanal craft, let's say palm weaving, and to take that into a global conversation that is now being collected as a collectible item is also, I think, an important positioning for Al-Ula globally. Another example, I think I'll go back to one of our core assets, which is Wadi al-Fan. And Manal Adwayan, those who visited the Arts Festival last year, has showed some of the research that she's been doing for her work in Wadi al-Fan, which is titled Oasis of Stories. And in that, she's integrated and connected with, I would say, almost every single house in Al-Ula to really capture their stories, the stories they want to tell to the world, and those will be engraved in her work. And I remember having the workshops. I mean, we've scheduled workshops with the schools in Al-Ula, with some of the community members, all the kind of societies, the art society, the music society, all of those. And then we had a huge demand of people who heard about it and were not able to join. And then we had an open session in Daymuma, and we were expecting, I think, 200 people. We ended up with over 500 people, and just everyone, the last day, everyone wanted to tell their story, from a 5-year-old kid all the way to a grandmother. So that's a really interesting way of archiving and documenting the stories of the community that will permanently be in Wadi al-Fan.
So I think that question, actually, before we close the panel, really inspired a thought. So we've spoken about the museum in the context of Saudi Arabia, and maybe even within the context of the Gulf, and what it can perform for the community, whether in archiving present and past histories. We live today in a region where we're seeing wars in Lebanon, in Palestine, Iraq, and Syria. What is the role, and this is a question for all of you, either personally or as your institution, what is the role of the museum institution today towards the larger Arab region, and how can it cater for these artists, creatives, or maybe even other institutions that exist in different places?
So when we think about, what we're trying to do here, which is, we all run museums and we're talking about art and artists, I think something that's so important, and I'm sure something that we all do on a daily basis at our desks, is we're creating a whole ecosystem and a whole industry. And there's an economic dimension to this, there's a social dimension to this. You can't transform a country through, infrastructure alone. To transform properly, you have to grow, you have to learn, you have to debate, you have to challenge your thoughts. And these museums are sites where that happens. They're sites where for expression. They're safe havens to think about things in a different way. Not just for the artists who we show and we commission, but for the audience who gets to come in and see things that represent them, that might not represent them, and question why. And I think that's incredibly important. And so there's, but to go back to the economic dimension, not to sound like incredibly corporate, but the country's changing, right? And we cannot be dependent on oil anymore. And so a big part of our job is when we're bringing our audiences in, is to convince them that arts and culture, with a capital C or a small c, is sustainable. It's something to study, it's something to work in, and it touches on all aspects of your life, whether that's personal, educational, social, what have you. So there's also this job. We're trying to expand the country, and especially in the context with what's happening in our region, we don't take that lightly.
Nora, you're about to add to that? Yeah? Okay. Okay, I think with that, if anyone has any other questions, I think we'll close the panel. Thank you, everyone.